Thanks for watching another episode of Psycosmos. Today I have, of course, my great friend Andrew, and he actually asked me to do a quick natal chart reading for him. So in a very high level, I'm going to go over the next 20 to 30 minutes where I'm going to ask Andrew a couple of questions and gauge his natal chart reading just to kind of, one, show off some of the layers that astrology has as far as the in-depths on our personality, and then number two, also to give my friend a good overall reading. Just to be clear, I'm more of an intermediate modern astrologer. I wouldn't consider myself an expert. I don't really think you should really trust anybody who says they're an expert, because this stuff is so convoluted and so intense and so in-depth. There's still so much that even today we're still trying to crack, and this is stuff that we've been trying to figure out for thousands of years. So just keep a really high-level open mind with this. But my friend Andrew here, I got his chart open up on the screen. For the first three things that you always want to look for in an astrology chart are where the sun was located when you were born, where the moon was located when you were born, and what degree or angle the eastern horizon was. Now there's a few reasons for this. Number one, the sun and the moon are pretty obvious. Most people are not going to argue with the notion that the sun and moon have some form of effect on us here on Earth. You can go outside, you can feel sunlight. We know that the moon controls the tides, and we know that we are mostly made of water. So with the moon having that kind of degree of influence, you can go and check police reports. You'll find that on full moons there's way more crime and activity than compared to new moons. You can also check and track the stock market against lunar new moons and full moons, and you'll find that there's definitely an emotional quotient that is really probably not being fully observed when it comes to some of the planets. Now each planet most of the time has its own little degree of attributes and things like that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read into the chart that I have presented here, and just for everybody back at home, one of the key most important things to know in your chart is your time of birth. So without your time, you can't get your rising, but you also can't get deeper details that I'm going to kind of show here with Andrew. So what I see in your chart is you have a sun in Virgo, which is actually right on the cusp of Leo and Virgo. I know a few people who have that kind of energy, and I'll detail what a cusp is in a second. But your moon is Aquarius, and that's a pretty estranged moon sign. It's kind of almost closer towards the middle, so your initial mental faculties are very much so Saturnian in nature. Now, let me get into what that means. Your rising sign is also Libra. I'm going to get into what all that means right now. So as far as from an energetic perspective, you have a majority of three specific types of energy. Those would be earth, fire, and air. The earth comes from your Virgo. The fire comes from your Leo that you have cusped together. You do have, I see, a Mars in Virgo. I see you have a Scorpio and Pluto. That's going to be very common because Pluto is a very slow-moving planet. So I was born in 94. You were born in 91. I also have Scorpio and Pluto. It's a very slow-moving planet. Doesn't change planets per, I think, around 20 years or so. So a lot of people who were born with Pluto in Scorpio specifically, Pluto actually gets its power. It's the most powerful in the sign of Scorpio. So people like you and I, we are the people who are really undertaking a lot of the I would say responsibility in what in our current modern society needs to die and needs to be rebirthed and reborn into something new. So people who were really born between the ages of, and I could have this math wrong, but it's somewhere around 97, 98, 99. That's at the latest cusp, going to about 1980. So right between that area is going to be a big group of people who are here to make very pivotal change. In fact, a lot of the craziness that we're seeing right now is because Pluto is actually shifting from where it was before in Capricorn into the sign of Aquarius. So just to give some perspective, whenever Pluto shifts, there's always something very major. When Pluto was in Sagittarius, when we were kids, it shifted into Capricorn right when we had the 2008 giant collapse and crash. Now it looks like we're heading towards another one, and that, of course, there's always these these types of decade-long gaps with Pluto. But you have that same form of energy in your chart, so you definitely are one of those types of people who are here to make a big societal-based change. It could be anything. It could be literally any form of anything, but Pluto being like one of the most outwardly planets, that's something that's more of a generational thing rather than something personal, but it does kind of bleed into our personal faculties. You and I are kind of really heavily in that sphere of influence, I would say. So you also have a Saturn in Aquarius. Saturn shifts roughly every 2 to 3 years. So my Saturn is in Pisces because I was born a couple years after you. But the big things, I'm seeing a lot of really big major things, and I want to touch in on some of those. So I gotta know, when you were about like between the ages of 6 and 8 years old, what was going on at that time? There must have been something that was very uprooting, maybe, possibly. It could be something that was really, really important to you, and it even bled into when you were probably about 9, 10, or 11, that really stuck with you. So I would say probably about the ages between 7 and 11 were pretty big for you, at least from your own emotional perspective. Let me know if I'm hitting any nails or not.
Sure. When I was growing up, we moved geographic locations quite a bit, which, uprooted from this friend group to this friend group, getting back into the groove of things and learning how to do that effectively.
Mm-hmm.
And during that time, there was my mother and it wasn't my biological father at that time, but they got a divorce. So there was a divorce happening there as well, and that was right in that time period.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Did you have any early deaths, like probably before you could remember, when you were a young child?
I, oh man, when I was 12, my biological father did pass.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So I see that specifically right around where your moon placement is, and so that might not make a lot of sense. So let me at least expand upon a little bit of what I'm talking about. So when I read a natal chart, there's many different ways that you can read it, but basically what I use is there's really no name for it. I'll just call it the house method. The house method is, do you see on the inner white circle of that chart, you have, starting on the left, you have AS, and then you have numerical 2, numerical 3, numerical 4, and it goes around in a circle? So,
Yeah.
so between each of those points is roughly about 2.5 years of your life. So starting at AS would be your birth, and then going from there, it'll make a full circle every 30 years. Now, I've asked people about their specific information at expos, events, people I have absolutely no idea. I'll ask them a couple of questions and I'll guess what time they were born within a 30-minute window. Because I'll ask them things like, when did you get married to your current spouse? When did you have your first child? What was your childhood like revolving around your parents? And all I have to do then is spin the dial to acclimate all of those major fixation points that I see, that I'm trained, that I can see, and then I'm able to get it within such a minute window that you can actually guess what time people were born. It's actually really crazy. But
Wow.
I see a lot of that craziness in those shifts. But then after your father died, there was almost like a semblance of like, it's time to kind of step up. It's time to become who I'm supposed to be. Like, there was definitely some struggles, but it looks like you went through a pretty long period of finding yourself for yourself, because you had very little to go off of now that your father had passed away. And that doesn't, that's not knocking your mom or anything, but that's just a very common trait that I see, especially since it was relatively around your moon sign. That must have been a very large, impactful thing that happened to you. But then tell me about what I'm seeing here. If you'll notice, you'll look in your chart, you have your Sun, your Venus, your Mercury, and your Jupiter, it looks like. Yeah, all on top of each other. That's a very, very powerful energy that you have, because that tail end of Leo going into Virgo, if I'm not mistaken, it's either degree 28 or 29, is ruled by the star Regulus, which is a very regal star. So a lot lot of people who have that type of energy are very much, they know themselves, and they're not going to let anybody else tell them otherwise. They're not going to let anybody else fuck with their own perception of themselves. They really know themselves, and a lot of the time they will have naysayers come up in their life who will point the finger and say, you don't know this, blah blah, wagging the finger. Those people are some of the strongest when it comes to remaining firm, standing tall and proud, and saying, fuck you, I'm not going to do any of that shit that you're telling me. Like, I'm not going to believe any of that. Yeah, so I see very, very large accentuation. It's not only in the way that you are physically on the outside with everyone around you, but it's also the way you think. It's because of your Mercury placement. It's the way you love because of your Venus placement. And it's the way that you want to gear your career or your personal growth or your major overall life's purpose because of your Jupiterian placement. So it's really you knowing your own shit and proving it to the world is like a huge thing for you. And you don't even have to prove it for other people. You're proving it because of yourself, because you're like, I know better. I know this stuff. You don't clearly know this stuff. I'm going to prove you wrong. I'm going to show you like the shit that's real, and I'm going to show you my real authentic self. So let me know if that hits any nails on the yeah.
Well, exactly. Nail on the head is the perfect way to phrase that. Yes. And I'll relate it directly to the things that I know and about myself and about the world I'm experiencing. I'm not going to be shaken from that. I'm not going to have wool pulled over my eyes, and I'm not going along with things for the sake of convenience. And I don't really care who thinks anything about me because of that. I think that the truth is what deserves to have its day, and that goes into what you're talking about with Pluto. So, yeah.
Yeah, for sure, and I mean, I see a lot of that energy that's very, very powerful and potent. I also see, though, it's right across from your moon, so there may have been certain times in your life where you've really like second guessed yourself, even with all that powerful energy. You've literally sat there and been like, it's not that I care what everybody else is saying. It's, am I on the right path for me? Am I doing the right thing for myself? You have a lot of that. Actually, if you see the red lines that are kind of going across from where you have those big energy placements up in the corner down to across from your moon, and that actually leads into even your father's death. When your biological father passed away, there was a lot of reinventing because of the opposition that you have to those other planets. There was a lot of reinventing of who am I? How do I love? How am I going to think? How am I going to be? How am I going to evolve? There are all these different questions that are culminating around that one fixated point of where your father passed away. But the beauty of that is it all comes back around. See, there's nothing ever that's inherently negative or positive in any of these charts. A lot of people will tell you different things. Even I will really oversimplify it, because this is such a science. It's down to such an interesting, very complex, complicated degree. I mean, I'm more than happy to admit myself, like I don't have all this stuff figured out, but I know enough. I know enough to ask the right questions. So around the age of, I want to say like 25, 26, 27, it seems like you had a lot going on. Do you want to expand on that a little bit for me? Like, what was going on around that time?
Yeah, you bet. Okay, so I was in college as a resident assistant. I was 25. I started to feel like I'm getting a little old for this place, and just in comparison to who I was around in my resident assistant status. Not that, anyhow, not being discriminatory there, and I was in a relationship also who it was quite a defining time for, like you said, how I love and how much am I willing to give, and can you give too much? And then I lost my, and then what? And then am I doing the right thing here by giving so much? And then she just took, and we didn't make it.
That was probably a very mentally taxing time, because that time, even with the Venus, which often Venus and Mars signify as relationships. What I have found is if you're a male, Venus signifies a relationship. If you're a female, Mars will signify a relationship. If you're heterosexual, that is. But with that being said, you had all that going on, but it was opposite of your moon. So your moon is your mental faculties. So even though maybe there was a lot of things that were really working for you in that relationship, mentally you were going through a whole cavalcade of trying to process and piece together and puzzle, make all these different parts, these moving parts that you had in your life. So Jupiter and Mars are right on top of each other. So you actually, the more that you think critically about something, the more that you really put your heart into your thought process, the more that you evolve personally. That's just a very powerful thing in your chart. But on top of that, your Sun and Venus are also very close together too. So the way that you are, think, love, and evolve are very intertwined in your personal character. And again, they're all right on top of that star Regulus. So Regulus is like one of the king stars. There's actually a, if I'm not mistaken, I think they're called like the Bohemian 12 or something along those lines. There's a group of stars that are very powerful in the sky. Regulus is one of those specific stars where it brings great fame and fortune and infamy, not like famous like a celebrity, but fame in your own regard of what you're trying to seek in life. However, it comes with a cost of being the king, if that makes sense. You know what I mean? You like what's that one analogy? There's that one story of the king. I cannot remember it, but I think it's I wanted to call it Balthasar's sword, but it's not that. I'm mixing that up with Balthasar's feast. There's a story of a king, and he's with a pauper or a peasant guy, and the peasant basically says, "It's so easy for you to talk from your high horse, like you're the king. You must feel great all the time." So the king chuckles and says, "You want to know how I feel? Fine. You come sit in my throne." And everybody in the whole courtroom's astounded by this, because they're like, if you can't do that. He's the king. Like, you can't sit in his throne. But the king invites this poor, nasty, ugly peasant to sit in his throne. And right before his butt hits the seat, he says, wait, something's not right here. And he gets a guy to come over, and they send a man on the rafters, and they hang a sword right above the seat. And he says, "Okay, now sit down." And the guy looks up at the sword, and he looks at the chair, and he looks up at the sword again. He says, "No, I'm good. I don't want to sit in that chair." And he's like, "That's what it feels like to be king. You're sitting there almost like at any point in time, anybody could sneak up behind me and cut that cord, or by a grace of God, that sword could just fall on top of me, impale me, and kill me right here and now." But that's what it feels like to be king. So there's always a semblance of, you are almost built for greatness in whatever field or respective area that you go towards. But there's always that uncertainty, especially since you have your moon right opposing. You probably have had tons of friends who've backstabbed you and did you dirty in a lot of wide variety of ways. But that's because you have such a culminating energy of you knowing yourself. I hate to say it, but it's almost like somewhat of a lonely journey until you really find those people that you really feel acclimated towards. And I don't know if you felt that kind of semblance, but that is going to be something. I mean, there's only one king, is really the way that it explains. I know a lot of people with that Regulus energy. There's only one king. There's not, you can have room for a queen or whatever, but that's like as far as it goes. You have your jesters and you have your court marshals and your people that you trust in your little group of circle, but there's only one king, and because of that, it's a very lonely road. There's going to be a lot of times, especially maybe in your childhood, where people look down on you, they cast judgment on you, they treat you like shit, they treat you poorly because of assumptions that they made. But what a lot of people don't get probably is that it's really rooted in jealousy, and that's not knocking anybody specifically, because I don't know all the people you've dealt with in your life, but a lot of the times what I find is people who have that Regulus energy, sometimes they're either really misunderstood because they think in such a high level that a lot of other people can't like get on that level, because you're cusp in Leo and Virgo. And I mean, Leo is like the heartfelt appreciation of all things, and Virgo's like the master of intuition. So it's really a combination of those two things, because a cusp is a combination of both of those faculties. A lot of people don't believe in cusps. I do, but that's just me. That's from my experience, but it's that balance. And not to mention, you also have your Mars is in Virgo towards the later half. So I'm gonna guess maybe around like 28, 29, you may have had some trouble with the law. Maybe Johnny Law was coming with his gunslinging, because that's where you got your Mars. And if your father already passed away, then generally speaking, that's either a grandfather, an uncle, or an authority figure. So was I right right around that time?
Yes.
Okay.
Not only the law, but yes, male figures, my uncle, and others, really asserting their, male dominance and against someone like me, still not standing down. I just, and it's so there is some definite turbulence, for sure.
Yeah. Okay.
Absolutely.
That's what I would have guessed because there's you do have that energy, and then I also love to give because I think I've dealt a little bit into it. I never really like to look too deep into the future because the future is often it's way too muddled, and I've made assumptions and I've pretty much been right, but then that kind of makes me feel like, did I put that idea subconsciously into people's heads? So I don't do divination type of stuff, right? But I can go
Fair.
off of your past and I can tell different aspects of that. I will tell you that you do have energy, which, like, if any male authority figure really stands up to you, so long as you don't second guess yourself, you have to really ride your intuition. I mean, and I'll explain this very simply. Your moon is in Aquarius, and it juxtaposes all of that Regulus energy. Again, not a bad thing. It just shows where we're going to have some hiccups as far as like the mental faculties, right? So moon being in Aquarius, Aquarius is the sign of man. It's the sign of people. You probably heard we're in the age of Aquarius right now. So you really get people. But the one thing that is your problem is people don't get you. So they'll say things and they'll cast their judgment, and then you might really respect some of these people. It could be family members, could be close friends, and you'll sit there and you'll say, maybe they're right. Maybe don't second guess yourself. That would be my advice to you based off of what I'm seeing. Anytime that you second guess yourself, it's going to end in basically you potentially making a bad decision. You have to feel it. You have to feel it. That's actually your big strong thing. I'm gonna take a wild guess and assume that a lot of what you do is not rooted in the logical fallacies of the world. It's because you feel that this shit is not right, and you feel like there is injustice. So all of that feeling that you have is really concrete. That is really ultimately what encapsulates your character as a person. You have the feeling heart of Leo with the logical mind of Virgo in a lot of your placements. You have it coupled with Aquarius, which is very disciplined. It's very sturdy in certain aspects. When it comes to people, you might be a little wishy-washy because you don't know who to trust. You don't know who to really put your faith in and stuff like that. So from my personal opinion, I would say, I read charts a lot. I read a ton of people's charts. I see people where they have anger issues. I don't really see that in your chart. I see people who have problems with, they struggle with addictions or things like heroin or drinking or weed or whatever. I don't really see that in your chart. You have a lot of discipline. You have a lot of really channeled energy. I feel like what your thing is second guessing based off of the opinions of other people. I would avoid that as much as possible if I were you, because whatever your first initial gut instinct is to do, that's what I think is the thing that ultimately will give you the higher outcome in your opinion. Once you start to overthink things, that could end up deterring and leading down not a bad path, but it could be a lot more complicated, because what you're doing is you're deciding to side with your moon energy, which is on one half of your graph, which is basically by itself, versus your sun energy, which is all about who you really are. And I'm willing to also assume anytime that you've ever really put your faith into yourself without really second guessing it, it's often been a success. Maybe every time you second guessed it, it could have led down to a more complicated route. That would just be my initial guess based off of the spread that you got. Okay, so that's good. Yeah. So it's funny because this science is I know you a little bit, but it's not like I've heard your entire life story, but I'm able to gauge just these little tiny things based off of this graph. The only other thing that I would say is you might have an imbalance between the balances that you want for your life and your financial situation. That would be because of what I see between Lilith and between your ascendant, and oftentimes that can sometimes spark a controversy. Not like even necessarily you're a big overspender or anything like that. It's just that there's a discrepancy there between what you're able to accomplish with your financial gains. It's like you want to do so much more to change the world, but it's like God has given you it one piece at a time, and you really wish that it would come a lot faster. But I want you to know that is all actually grouped in right around your sign of Capricorn, where you have a pretty good amount of energy. That is actually where you have your major what I would call destiny placements. Okay, so your destiny placements are really rooted in basically two things. It's between like your midheaven and then your north node, but you actually have them opposing, which means that there's going to be a conflict between two major areas of your life, and that is going to be spiritual and financial. And so those two quadrants are very juxtaposed. But my recommendation personally would be that for you to feel more peace of mind, the best thing for you to do is to find the equal balance between the two. And it has to be equal, because if you lean more one way than the other way, it's going to influx at a very strange point, where it's going to take out on your own personal balance of life. So walking this line between that financial and spiritual freedom is going to ultimately give you the liberation that you want to feel from an inwardly perspective, which is actually your rising, which is Libra, which is a balancing act. So you're constantly, perpetually striving towards that balance. World balance, personal balance, familial balance, friend balance, a balance of all things where things are just and fair. That's really something that's at the heart and core of your being, and the way that you're going to emphasize that in your personal life is to balance your financial situation with your spiritual situation, so that they become harmonious. They're not diametrically opposed. They're actually quite harmonious in the way that you specifically can do them. But you got to look inward for yourself and find that energy within yourself that's telling you what to do. And then you just have to be very critically logical about the way that you feel, to the point where you're not second guessing yourself, but you're using your mind to figure out, how do I overcome this feeling and make it into action? How do I put it out into the real world? If you do that, then everything else around you is going to fall into place. I'm already saying stuff I'm sure that you already know, but that would be yeah. Anyway, let me know how I did. That's where I'm going to leave it right there. But I want to know how I did. Yeah.
Double thumbs up. Double thumbs up. I wanted to mention to you a couple things. I always have had an affinity for the sun. I'm not worshiping the sun or anything, but the sun has always just been something like, I always tell people, I feel like I'm solar powered when it's a sunny day. It's just absolutely wonderful.
Yep.
And then on the other side, my favorite moon phase is when it's in a half.
There you go.
And
that's today. That's today, and it's in Libra, which is your rising sign. Actually, that's today. It's right in half. Yeah. But that's
awesome.
That's actually a big thing for you, because with your rising being in Libra, you want to balance all faculties and traits of yourself. You want to balance. You have these two major oppositions, which aren't a bad thing. Again, it shows where you need to actually balance the things in your life. So my recommendation would be, don't second guess yourself as much, and also understanding that the spiritual and financial things are more intertwined than they are opposed, and you can actually use one to get the other, and vice versa. You know, in other words, like, you can use your spiritual prowess to attain financials, but you can also use your financials to buy good, healthy food and, you know, spirit and books, and spiritually incline yourself. They're feeding off of each other. They're not completely opposite. So for you specifically, if you master that, oh boy. Oh man, I wouldn't want to piss you off. I want to say, right the hell out of your way, because you're gonna take over the world, buddy. Like, that's the stuff that you got. I'm serious. So that would be. I'm very happy that resonated with you, because again, I study these things all day. I see lots of issues, lots of this and this. You know, some people have anger issues, and I'm like, what's going on with that anger? And they're like, how the fuck do you know that? And I'm like, whoa, all right, you know. But it's like, there's so many different ways to break these things down, and I love how complex and complicated it can get. But anyway, I really appreciate your input, and I appreciate you letting me do this, because I love doing these types of things. You know, I get people on TikTok and everything all the time saying, like, you should pay to have natal charts being read and blah blah blah, and I'm like, yeah, I do it for free, because I genuinely think that this is a science that people, once you learn it and you understand the inner mechanisms of everything, you know, it's a science that can help you. You know what I mean? A a lot of people like the psychology test of the 16 personalities. I feel like that's way more masculine driven. Astrology is more feminine driven. I'm not casting judgment on anybody, but that's generally what I found. Like, you know, but at the end of the day, this is one of the oldest sciences that we have. We have thousands of years of history wrapped around understanding what the fuck this thing is and that thing is. It's, you know, what does it mean if my moon's in this sign? It's like there's actually a lot of things that it means, but you gotta like go through the motions to really understand the implications of that. And actually, your midheaven is Cancer, which is my sign, which is probably why you and I get along so well, because there's that essence of like a spirituality in our friendship where we see things on a much higher level. My midheaven is Libra, so that's your rising sign. So I really want to ascribe towards like my higher purpose in a sense is really towards balance. Your higher purpose is like very like a spiritual healing type of energy where it's like, you know, I want to make the world a just place. I want to make it a balanced place for everybody so that there's fairness and equality, which is something that I really jive with, you know, because we have all these very similar placements. So I love that. It's very formulaic, but I've studied this stuff for many years, close to a decade at this point. And so I think, again, I like to call myself intermediate because I don't like to think like I'm some big expert guru, like I know exactly what I'm talking about. But it seems like I hit a couple nails. Like it seems like I did a pretty good job.
Absolutely.
Okay, cool.
You bet. Cool. And Matt, if I could ask you one quick one.
Yeah.
Saturn. What's the scoop with Saturn? I get a lot of questions maybe in my own world about Saturn, and it doesn't get the best rap in some ways, right? And
yep.
I do wonder about that and maybe how it pertains to this chart.
Okay, yeah, so great question. So you actually have a very positive Saturn placement. You are like 32 or so now, so you actually went through your Saturn return a couple of years ago. Saturn return is a big astrological placement. I'm going to try to explain this as best as I can in a short period of time. Saturn's a very powerful astrological placement. A lot of people think of it as negative. Even I understand where people come from in the negative implications, but at the end of the day, all of these are just planets. You wouldn't say that the Earth is good or bad. It's both. So all of them are both. So Saturn often shows us stability. It's the grandfather of the sky. So it is really the ruler of time in our chart. The times of passing, the times of change, times of responsibility, times in which we evolve and change, but on a very more subconscious level compared to Jupiter, which is more outwardly growth. A lot of this has to do with actually the asteroid belt placement, because where the asteroid belt is, Jupiter is in the place of the Sun, Saturn is in the place of Mercury. So Saturn is like a moon, almost kind of moon to Jupiter in the same way that the Sun, Mercury is kind of like a moon to the Sun. So Mercury rules the mind. Saturn is a very mental figure, but it's a lot more in-depth. It's a lot more stressful, but it also gives you rewards. Saturn's all about karma and karmic return. That's why we call it a Saturn return, because right around the year that you're about 30 years old, roughly like 28 to 32, you're going through this period where everything that you didn't learn that you were supposed to learn for this lifetime is going to get taught to you real fucking quick in that period of time. And you're going to learn a lot of shit really, really fast, no matter who you are or what. And that happens when, you're not only 30, but also when you're 60, and also if you make it to 90. So it's like every 30 years or so in your chart. But in your chart specifically, Saturn is a very positive placement because it's right between Capricorn and Aquarius, which is actually the two signs that are ruled by Saturn, Capricorn and Aquarius. So you have a lot of very good stability, discipline, Saturnian energy. You're very good at keeping up with the times. That's never been a problem for you. Not to mention, you have a very good trine aspect with your Mars. So Saturn and Mars are both in a very good conjunction. So anything having to deal with those familial situations, you're always going to come on top. If you have, a nasty dad or an uncle or a brother or a grandfather or anything like that, you're going to come out on top regardless of how long it takes because of that. And the last thing I'll say is, because of where you have it in the fourth house, that's often about your home. So you're very disciplined when it comes to your home life. Behind closed doors, you could probably rest assured that you've got a lot of things taken care of in a very pretty disciplined area. But it looks like we got less than a minute left. Is there anything else I can ask or answer? Yeah.
Very good, very good.
I
just wanted to mention to you, thank you so much for everything you're doing, your book, your teachings on TikTok,
Thank
everything
you.
you're about, man. This
Oh,
is
it's
just
all love,
wonderful.
brother. It's
So
all
thanks.
love. You know that. It's all the same to you, man. We're all making a big change here. That's what we're all here for, bro. That is what we're all here for. We're making that big splash, and it's gonna keep coming whether people like it or not. So, but thanks everybody for watching, and thank you, Andrew. Again, I know that we're up on time here, but lots of love to you, man. And we'll chat. We'll chat soon. I'll message you on TikTok.
Sounds great.
All right,
Take
cool.
care.
Yep. Talk to you. Take care.